The laughter stopped. Just like that. Mid-1960s. Somewhere in the desert outside Los Angeles. A Western film set baking under afternoon sun. Wooden false front buildings. Dust hanging in still air. The smell of hot wood and generator exhaust. A young stuntman named Derek Walsh had just broken the studio's quick draw record. 0.42 seconds. Electronic timer confirmed it. Crew members gathered around and pressed, congratulating him. Derek was 26, fast, confident, and very aware that he'd just beaten a mark that had stood for 3 years. He was demonstrating the technique again. Explaining the mechanics. Loose grip. Minimal motion. Modern efficiency. The old guys, Derek said loud enough for everyone to hear. They had all that ceremony. All that ritual. Stance, breath, focus. He laughed. That stuff doesn't matter anymore. It's just mechanics. Physics. The old technique is obsolete. Some of the older crew members shifted uncomfortably. A few looked toward the far end of the set, where a figure stood in shadow near the saloon facade. Yul Brynner had been watching. Silent. Still. A cigarette between his fingers, smoke rising straight up in the windless heat. Derek didn't notice. Or didn't care. I mean, look at the data. Modern method beats classic style every time. Speed is speed. You can measure it. He held up the electronic timer like a trophy. 0.42. That's not opinion. That's fact. The older crew members weren't looking at Derek anymore. They were looking at Brynner. Yul crushed his cigarette under his boot. He stepped out of the shadow. In the mid-1960s, on a film set, a young stuntman said, "The old technique doesn't work anymore." Yul Brynner emerged from the shadows, made one move, and it took 30 years for people to understand what they'd witnessed. Brynner walked toward the group. Not fast. Not slow. Just walking. He wore all black shirt, pants, gun belt. His iconic bald head caught the harsh overhead light. His face showed nothing. No anger. No offense. Nothing. The conversation died. Derek turned, saw Brynner approaching, and his confident smile flickered slightly. "Mr. Brynner," Derek said, trying to maintain his energy. "I was just explaining the new quick-draw technique. I broke the studio record. 0.42 seconds. Brynner stopped about 8 feet away. He looked at Derek. Then at the electronic timer. Then back at Derek. He didn't speak. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. The crew stood frozen. Someone's walkie-talkie crackled and was immediately muted. Finally, Brynner spoke. His voice was quiet. Almost gentle. "Show me again." Derek blinked. The draw?" "Yes." Derek glanced at the crew, then back at Brynner. "Sure. Of course." He positioned himself, hand hovering near his holstered prop revolver. "So the key is minimizing." "Just show me," Brynner said. Still quiet. Still gentle. But something in his tone made Derek stop explaining and just do it. Derek drew. Fast. Clean. The revolver came up in a blur. 0.42 seconds of pure mechanical efficiency. The crew waited. Derek looked at Brynner, expecting something. Acknowledgement. Critique. Anything. Brynner just nodded once. "Good speed." Derek relaxed slightly. "Thank you. Like I said, it's all about." "But you're dead," Brynner said. The words dropped like stones into still water. Derek's smile disappeared. "What?" "You're dead," Brynner repeated, same quiet tone. "You were dead before your hand moved." Derek laughed nervously. I mean, I'm fast. 0.42 is. Speed doesn't matter if the decision is already made." Brynner's eyes never left Derek's face. "You're measuring the wrong thing." The crew was absolutely silent now. A few of the older members were nodding slightly, understanding something Derek hadn't grasped yet. "I don't understand," Derek said, his confidence cracking at the edges. Brynner didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Speed, Brynner said, is what you do after you decide. But decision comes first. Always. The man who has already decided doesn't need speed. He's already won. He gestured toward Derek's holster. You wait for your hand to move. You react. You measure. You're fast, yes. But you're still reacting. Brynner's hand dropped to his own holster. Not fast. Not slow. Just there. Fingers resting on the grip of his prop Colt. No tension. No preparation. Just presence. I don't wait, he said quietly. I already decided. Before you walked onto this set today, I decided. The moment you spoke, I decided. Right now, I've decided. You're measuring the time between intention and action. But I have no gap. There is no time to measure. Derek stared at Brynner's hand. The hand that hadn't moved fast, hadn't drawn, was just there. And somehow, Derek understood that if this were real, if any of this were real, he would already be finished. Would you like to see? Brynner asked. Derek swallowed. Nodded. Brynner didn't count down. Didn't prepare. Didn't telegraph. He simply stood there, hand near his holster, looking at Derek with those penetrating eyes. And then, in a moment so subtle that half the crew would argue later about whether they actually saw it happen, Brynner's hand moved. Not fast. Not slow. Outside of speed. The weapon appeared in his hand as if it had always been there, as if drawing and having drawn were the same instant, as if there was no transition between holstered and ready. Derek's own draw, the .42-second record breaker, looked like slow motion by comparison. Not because Brynner was faster, but because Brynner had already been there. Had already decided. Had already moved before Derek's nervous system had even registered the need to move. The electronic timer in Derek's hand read 0.00. Error. Couldn't measure it. The device needed a gap between start and finish. But Brynner had given it no gap to measure. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. Brynner holstered his weapon. Same smooth motion. No flourish. No performance. Just function. Speed, he said quietly, is what people measure when they don't understand timing. Timing is what people study when they don't understand decision. Decision is what you make when you've already survived. He looked at Derek, and for the first time, there was something almost like kindness in his expression. You're fast. You're very fast. But you're practicing a technique. I'm not practicing anymore. I stopped practicing 30 years ago. Derek stood there, his record-breaking draw suddenly feeling hollow. What were you doing 30 years ago? Surviving, Brynner said simply. When survival is the only thing that matters, you learn. You learn that speed is a luxury. You learn that decision is everything. You learn that the man who hesitates is already dead, and the man who has to be fast hasn't decided yet. He started to walk away, then paused. Look back. Your .42 seconds is impressive. In a competition you might win. But in the real thing? He shook his head slightly. In the real thing, there are no timers. There's only before and after. And the difference between them isn't speed. It's decision. He walked back toward the shadow near the saloon facade. The crew stood frozen, processing what they just witnessed. Derek looked down at his electronic timer, still reading error, and realized he'd been measuring the wrong thing his entire career. One of the older crew members, a man named Frank who'd worked with Brynner on 3 films, walked over to Derek. He put a hand on the young stuntman's shoulder. Kid, Frank said quietly, what you just saw, that wasn't a technique. That was a man who learned something the rest of us pray we never have to learn. Yul doesn't practice quick draw. Yul survived situations where quick draw was the only thing between him and death. There's a difference. What situations? Derek asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Frank shook his head. He doesn't talk about it. But those of us who've worked with him long enough, we've seen things. Moments when the acting stops and something else comes through. Something real. Something that has nothing to do with Hollywood. While others measured speed, Brynner was already acting. The story spread. Not immediately. Not as gossip. But slowly, over years, among stunt coordinators and fight choreographers and old hands who understood the difference between performance and reality. Derek Walsh never forgot that afternoon. He continued his career, became one of the top quick-draw artists in Hollywood, won competitions, set more records. But he never again claimed that speed was everything. He never again dismissed the old techniques. In interviews years later, he would say, "I was fast. Yul Brynner was decided." And decided beats fast every single time. The electronic timer that registered 0.00 that day was kept by the studio's head of props. He mounted it in a small frame with a note. The day's speed became irrelevant. Brynner never spoke about the incident. He didn't need to. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about correcting a dangerous assumption, the assumption that measuring performance was the same as understanding reality. On sets after that day, young performers would sometimes ask Brynner about his technique, about his speed, about how he made it look so effortless. He would give the same answer every time. "I don't have a technique. I have a decision. The decision was made a long time ago. Everything after that is just aftermath." Some understood. Most didn't. Not until much later. Not until they'd lived long enough to understand the difference between practicing something and surviving something. What followed stayed with everyone who witnessed it, long after the set went dark. 3 decades later, in the 1990s, a film studies professor named Catherine Rhodes was conducting interviews for a documentary about classic Western films. She tracked down Derek Walsh, now in his 50s, teaching stunt coordination at a film school. "Tell me about working with Yul Brynner," she asked. Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I only worked near him once. But it changed everything I thought I knew." He told her the story. The record. The mockery. The moment Brynner emerged from shadow. The draw that couldn't be measured. "Here's what I didn't understand then," Derek said, looking directly at the camera. Yul Brynner wasn't acting when he played gunfighters. He wasn't pretending to be a man who had made a decision. He was a man who had made a decision, and they were paying him to show them what that looked like. Catherine leaned forward. "What decision?" "To survive," Derek said simply. "Whatever he went through, and I don't know the details, nobody really does, he went through something that taught him there's no gap between decision and action. There's only, I'm alive or I'm not. And everything else is just noise." He picked up an old photograph from his desk. The film set. The dusty street. A figure in black standing in shadow. "This is the only photo from that day," Derek said. "See how he's standing? See the way his weight is distributed. That's not a pose. That's not staging. That's a man who survived something and carries it with him, always. You can't fake that. You can practice it, study it, imitate it. But you can't fake it." "What happened to your timer?" Catherine asked. "The one that read 0. Derek smiled sadly. "I kept it for 20 years. Then one day I realized I was keeping it for the wrong reason. I was keeping it as a trophy. Look at the day I met Yul Brynner." But that's not what it was. It wasn't about me. It was about a moment when Hollywood performance met real survival, and real survival didn't even notice Hollywood was there. He paused. "I gave the timer to a museum. Not a film museum. A veterans museum. Because that's what it really was. Evidence that some men carry wars nobody sees. Share and subscribe, some stories deserve to be remembered." Yul Brynner died in 1985. At his memorial, dozens of actors and directors spoke. One old stuntman stood up and told the story of the day Brynner broke a timer by moving without measurable time. He ended with this. Yul didn't teach us to be fast. He taught us that decision comes before everything. And once you've decided, truly decided, speed becomes irrelevant. The electronic timer that read 0.00 sits in a small veterans museum in California. Next to it, a card reads, "Some men don't practice. They survived." This measures what's left after survival. Derek Walsh never broke another quick-draw record. He didn't need to. He'd learned the difference between performance and truth. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Years after Brynner's death, film students still watch that footage of him in westerns. They study his draws. They measure his speed. They try to replicate his technique. They're measuring the wrong thing. Brynner wasn't fast. He was already decided. And decided doesn't need a clock. The old technique didn't become legendary because it was fast. It became legendary because it was real. And real doesn't compete. It just is.